It's Wednesday, so let's chat. I'm Kanan Chandran, the publisher of stormasia.com, and this is our series of web chats that have been started as a result of COVID-19 and the inability for us to meet physically. So we're doing this virtually, and we raise a lot of discussions and issues, bringing in panelists with the expertise and the experience to share their knowledge with us. Today's discussion is on the nightlife in Singapore. Well, it's almost non-existent, so we'll have to see how that comes back on track. And we've got three panelists who are very experienced in this industry. We've got Dennis Foo, as a consultant and a nightlife business veteran. He has started more than 50 F&B and outlets and pubs and bars in 4 decades of activity. Welcome, Dennis, to this discussion.
Thank you, John.
We've also got Robbie Hoyes-Cock, as a CEO and founder, and he started the Podium Lounge during the Singapore Grand Prix, and that has spread to Melbourne, Monaco, and Abu Dhabi. Welcome, Robbie.
Thank you for having me.
And our third panelist is Chua Ee Chien. He's the owner of the cocktail bar Jekyll Hyde, and he's also on the pivoting committee of the Singapore Nightlife Business Association. Welcome, Ee Chien.
Hey.
Welcome, gentlemen. To start off, could we look at your perspectives on what this means to you, the closure, the effect of COVID? Ee Chien, you've been directly affected by it, as have you, Robbie. Could you tell me, Ee Chien, what are the implications of this closure to your business in the midterm to long term?
Yep. So I think from a nightlife perspective, and as you mentioned, it's something that's been affecting quite a number of businesses. I think for Jekyll Hyde specifically, we've been fortunate in the sense that we are a restaurant as well as a bar. So during that period of time where some of these other bars as well as probably night spots remain closed, we've been able to open up. But as part of that, obviously being part of the industry, I've been spending quite a bit of time with the Nightlife Business Association to figure out how we can help these businesses. So I think how we've been looking at it right now essentially is in a few different aspects or sections based on what we've seen with our members. And obviously since a majority of them can't open, they've been hurt quite badly, right? So I think especially for your clubs as well as your karaoke bars, even though the majority of them really are outstanding citizens in terms of managing the crowds and managing the patrons that come through, unfortunately there are certain restrictions that government has placed which prevents them from opening. So right now what we're trying to do is help them to try and move forward with their businesses, with either piloting with some restrictions or a number of restrictions in place, helping them pivot, which means they actually move from like a club or karaoke bar to a restaurant, for example, or exiting and being able to actually leave the industry completely, but with some support from the government in terms of how they go about doing that. So
how many members are there in the SNBA?
So we've got more than 100 members there. We've got a good number of basically any nightclub or restaurant or I guess a bar that serves alcohol to a certain extent would be there, right? So we've got hundreds of members there that participate.
Okay, all right, cool. So you're helping them to move into this F&B space for now. Right?
Exactly.
Okay, cool. Robbie, how about yourself? I mean, the Podium Lounge is picking up speed and gaining traction in other cities as well, and now, bang, it's been hit. What are your plans?
We hosted our 11th consecutive Formula One event, the Podium Lounge, over the Singapore Grand Prix last September, hosting over 10,000, high society guests, I guess, you can call it, Formula One drivers, celebrities, royalty, you name it. I mean, we very much perfected our craft over many years of hosting Grand Prix styled events. And of course, this year was really troubling as we were looking to even further expand this year together with the Ritz-Carlton Millennia, only to be faced with the uncertainty that COVID and all of its ramifications have caused. I guess in Singapore, it really started in January with the closure of, or was it a little, perhaps it was a little later than that, but it was the closure of the borders to China was the first step, which really sort of caused, for example, occupancy rates at the Ritz-Carlton dropped to like 40%. And as we progressed, it became more and more of a concern as to whether the Formula One would go ahead. And for us in particular, we've become accustomed to booking very large acts, international DJs, celebrity acts, all of whom require, at least a 6 to 9 month lead time to plan their act and travel, and also on our side to be able to promote it. So we made a call in March this year that whether or not the Formula One would go ahead, it would be almost impossible for us to host the Podium Lounge on the scale that we've been accustomed to. Thankfully, we haven't needed to pivot insofar as we have an extremely small team, and most of the partners involved in making the event a success are third parties. Whether we will do the Podium Lounge in 2021, of course, depends on the restrictions, the impact of the vaccine, the ability for people to travel, not just the artists that we book and our guests from the region and internationally, but also the Formula One drivers themselves. I mean, you would have just heard that Lewis Hamilton has caught COVID and will be out of this week's race. And that really does bring it home as to how serious and how this COVID debacle doesn't seem to be going anywhere anytime soon. And even with the relation to the vaccine, it doesn't seem that there's much global cooperation or understanding as to which vaccine is going to work, how it's going to be administered, what are the rules. Does one have to have a vaccine passport, for example, in order to attend events? So whilst we are very happy that the Singapore Grand Prix is once again on the official calendar for the 2021 Formula One circuit, this time for the first time in the beginning of October, that by no means means that we are actually going to see the Formula One in Singapore. Everything is still very much up in the air.
That's true. That's true. Dennis, having been in the space in this space for 4 decades, you stepped out of it 2 years ago. Big sigh of relief? Or do you feel, well, if I'd been there, I would have done this, and this to help the industry?
In fact, I've been spending time looking at what's happening in the industry because, with this circuit breaker period, lots of time on reflection. Yeah, answering your question, yes, there's a relief for me. But still, nightlife in Singapore, has gone to a certain scale. Now you spoke about the Podium Lounge. For Podium Lounge to happen, it's not just an F1. It's everything around it. The city itself, the state of its nightlife, and to make it a success. So there'll be other areas in which the, activities depend on nightlife. Like you put it in your circular, that is soft power of nightlife. So really, I'd like to mention something about SMBA since Ee Chien is here representing the pivoting committee. In fact, this is a period where I see that operators from all over, whether it's karaoke, whether it's dance club, bars and pubs, they all actually rally together. This is something in my 40 years in show business I've not seen. I think the number is in the mid-hundreds in terms of membership. And I think the bond that have generated because of COVID is strong. That's why you see a lot of measures. No, there's no lack of effort on the part of both the association, members of the association, the different operators, and definitely the authorities. Because I've never seen that kind of effort. And I don't think any city or country in the world, just in nightlife, they come up with 3 different approaches in how to survive this or really to make a decision about their business. First of all, you have the pivoting, which Ee Chien is very familiar. In fact, really, in the caption or the quote that I gave, is that the high cost of operating nightlife may just, save the day I think many people will probably interpret it as, how can that be possible? High cost will never save any day, you know. But really, if you look at the history of nightlife in Singapore, going back to the 80s, when I started, at that time there were just bars and restaurants, typical. It was development stage. You know, most of the bars were in hotel lobby lounges with entertainment, and then of course a few independents like us started. At that time, bars are bars, restaurants are restaurants, and then as it developed and grew, I like to use this experience of mine. It was in the mid '90s we saw a jump. I mean a boost in nightlife when the independent ladies became part of the audience, and that really grew the market. And in the 90s, the restaurants, smoking became an issue in the restaurants, and restaurants were not allowed to smoke, but bars could. And because of that, there's this distinction. You know, people who go to the bar when they drink, they tend to smoke because it enhances their experience. But in restaurant, it's a dining experience which is different. Now, why I bring smoking into this, it has everything to do with whether what I've just said, whether this high cost of operation will actually save the day. When in the late 2000s, early 2010s, what happened was smoking was banned in bars. And at that time, cost of space, that period till now, cost of space and cost of manpower has gone up substantially. I mean, for those who have operating night sport over a couple of decades, you will realize that. And then because of the smoking ban, both restaurants and bars actually are seamless in that sense, because end of the day, there's no demarcation or hindrance in terms of the ruling on this experience of smoking. Now, what happened is many operators, because of the high cost, have actually gone into operating restaurant cum bars. I think Ee Chien, your pivoting experience will tell you, actually many of them, whether the bars and restaurants, they already have food content because of this. Some of them even serve lunches, dinner, and the after hours became the night. Because we're all in the same confine, a food is actually complementary to spirits. In fact, wine and food pairing is the norm all over the world.
Can I just pick you up?
Yeah, sure. Yes.
On that, Dennis. Because what's the implication for bars and clubs that have strict Category 1 licenses, Cat 1, which specifically prohibits the serving of even nuts, let alone any food? So we're talking about the purists in the nightlife industry who have Cat 1 licenses. How are they being supported in the pivot towards being, a restaurant or having a food offering, or in the case of Zouk, a cinema with popcorn even?
Right. So
sure. Yeah.
So some of those bigger businesses definitely have those resources and ability to be able to kind of pivot, right? So Robbie, example of Zouk, they've been able to do that quite well and quite quickly. But for some of the smaller players or those independent owners, that's where SMBA has been working with the government to get the right support. And this is support in the term of money, where we're able to provide them with up to 80% or more in terms of covering their costs to move from just a bar, to your point with those licenses, over to a space where they can serve food. And then
so we're talking about a physical and terribly expensive moving of a venue rather than a reclassification of the existing license.
So it's a combination of both. One is the reclassification of the license. So one of the issues that they had all been facing is when they tried to even pivot and try and change the licenses, they were running into issues there because the government was saying, hey, this is not like a zone for this, and so on and so forth. And so what we've been working specifically with the government on is having a centralized system for them to be able to process that, so that they don't run into these roadblocks, and so that they can get those licenses switched.
And have there been any successful reclassifications from Cat 1 to
So they're actually in the middle of that right now.
Okay.
Yeah, and then what we're trying to do also, we've also been able to work with the government to make sure that when the time comes, they can actually pivot back, right? They can switch back because, look, I mean, we know, right? They're not going to do this long term, and that's completely fine, because there's no way you can tell someone to change their business model completely when they know how to subsist on something else, right? And so I think that's
So the government has been supportive to a large extent. They've been hearing the issues. Have they been helpful in trying to move things, as you say, in the middle of it?
Yes.
But would this move be a permanent move, or is it a temporary move?
So it would be a somewhat temporary move, but obviously temporary in a longer period of time, right? Because we don't know when COVID's actually going to get us back into a sense of normalcy.
Sure. Let me complete what I set out to speak. Thank you, Robbie, for that. Yeah, actually, what happened is, and when all these operations you see pre-COVID, many of them has already got food content. Apart from the Category 1 license, dance clubs, which is actually in terms of numbers is not the majority of night sports in Singapore. The majority would be the bars and pubs. Many of them have food content in terms of numbers. In terms of restaurant and bars, actually there are many concepts where a good restaurant has already got very good bar. They are all part and parcel of the nightlife, offerings in Singapore. Now, following on what Ee Chien has mentioned, now, and what has happened is because of the high cost, many operations would have been bars, have a restaurant element, and they were allowed to continue. And because of COVID, the demand element has actually dropped. During circuit breaker, it actually completely dropped. But when the circuit breaker was lifted, what has happened is that there was a pent up, and all these restaurants and bars actually thrived. In fact, the outskirts are doing well. In fact, some of them I heard is doing better than before. This is an equation of demand and supply. Central business district, because of working from home situation, more people are staying at the suburbs, and they have their happy hour, wine and dine outside of it. So it helps. It does create a core sustenance for the core operators. Then, where SMBA and the authorities, how they worked out is, for those who do not have the food element, they can pivot. And there's a lot of support measures, including grants for setting up a simple, pantry in the bar. And all this actually comes to one point, is that had it not been for high cost, there will be bars, restaurant, restaurant. And the restaurant is not part of nightlife. Bars will be. And that whole bar situation, like in many countries, by itself, I think they will face a collapse syndrome, so to speak. And recovering will be much harder. In Singapore, it is different because of all the different measures. SMBA has done a great job. And the authorities are giving a lot of support. So from pivoting, there is this pilot scheme. Yeah, pilot in terms of 25 venues will be allowed to test even without food content. And it is at least a lifeline of sorts. Though it is a thin thread, but still it is a lifeline. If you follow those measures and we adjust accordingly. Then there is this last but final bit where actually when operators really think they cannot sustain the business, then there's this exit potential where grants of 30,000 are given to individual companies who plan to exit. And I think there will be support in terms of retrenchment as well. So actually, what I'm trying to say is that we are facing it head on, whether it is the Operators Association and the authorities. And I think if there's any city in the world that can come back better, I think it would be Singapore because of all the different measures and the effort that's been put in by industry.
Okay.
And answering your question, Robbie, on the Category 1 license, I think Ee Chien has also mentioned that they can pivot and they can come back to its original form. after COVID.
Yeah, that is brilliant. One of the things you haven't mentioned, Dennis, is I mean, you mentioned obviously the sort of paradigm shift with the CBD generally seeing lower numbers as a whole, lower pedestrian foot traffic, lower cars, lower energy as people are working from home. And I know of several offices, in fact, that have closed entirely during this period and allowing their staff to work from home. So the rural scene is surviving and faring a little bit better. But one of the biggest impacts that, of course, a lot of businesses are seeing across Singapore, and particularly in the CBD, is that impact of having zero tourism, which over the years, whether it's the cocktail bar explosion or whether it's the MBS styled nightclubs, a lot of it has been designed specifically to attract tourism business into Singapore, whether it's over the weekend or whether it's in conjunction with weekends such as the Formula One. How nervous are you guys about the delays in opening up of green lanes? I mean, you've seen what's just happened with Hong Kong. I personally know 4 people who had booked tickets just to sort of see friends and catch up and get out of Singapore for a little bit. If this is delayed much further and we perhaps don't open our borders till the middle of next year even, what impact do you see this having over the next 6 months?
I mean, to your point, Robbie, I mean, the concern isn't just about opening up the borders, I guess, right? I mean, the first step would be to open up internally, and I think that's still the question, right? And it's a concern. It's not something that we can answer. It's more of a matter of how can we help people survive, or at least exit as much as possible. Because I mean, to your point, they probably won't open the borders till mid next year or even later next year, right? And the problem is they're not even letting clubs or karaoke places open up at all yet, right? So these businesses are going to die off long before the borders even open up. Because to be honest, they probably could subsist or at least survive on a local population. I think the concern is that because they can't even open up, they're not going to survive beyond a certain point.
That's a good point.
Yes.
And so do you get a recycle of businesses eventually? I mean, I don't know. I think that's an open-ended question there.
Sure.
Do we see property prices decreasing as a function?
Yeah, the property question is something that
there's always the argument that and you mentioned it as well, Dennis, that the stronger operators with stronger cash flow, with the ability to pivot, with bigger backers and more experience, may have the guile to be able to survive this crisis. And so the weaker operators will have no choice, despite all the support from the government and associations, nightlife or otherwise. Do we see there being a substantial shrinkage in nightlife options in Singapore that in turn will benefit the survivors?
Yes. Following on what Ee Chien has mentioned, we are dependent. A lot of things are outside of our border, beyond our control. So far, we've experienced probably half a wave. The first wave was heavy, but it's very dormitory based. But in many, many countries, they're seeing the third wave. So it is beyond our control when it comes to border, because it is really what other countries would do in their own system. In Singapore, I think one of the comforting thing is because Singaporeans are at home instead of being traveling abroad, and there's increase in consumption at home instead of Singaporeans spending overseas. Now, this part will mitigate one part of the equation. The other thing is because supply-demand equation, where because of all this reason, many have closed, and hence the supply shrink. As long as demand remains the same.
How many outlets have closed?
Last, I think it was reported was like, I think close to 100. I saw a figure 46 weeks ago, So it is much more than that. I think, and people are saying that by now, which is really by November, now it's already December, I think more would have closed. I think it would have passed 100.
Do you think that given this, if it continues like this, businesses are going to say, I have no idea how long this is going to go on for. I can't keep carrying on like this. I need to find something else to do. I throw in the towel. Do you think more of that will happen, and would SNBA be trying to assist in that regard? I mean, the government is already giving out $30,000 if you're going to quit a business, right? Would that be an issue, or do you see more of that happening likely? Ee Chien?
Wait, sorry, what's your question again?
Whether because of this protracted, closure of bars, whether business owners are going to say, "That's it, I'm out. I can't keep going on like this."
Yeah, I mean, to Dennis' point, that it has happened already, right?
Yes.
So, I mean, a good number, and I think there was one big drop off, I think, towards October, November, right, when some of the government support wasn't as prevalent anymore. And I guess whoever survived, I mean, it largely depends on how lucky you are, right? And unfortunately, business is half about how good you are and half is about luck, right? If you get like for example, if you get a really crappy landlord, you might just that might be the end of you, right? And that's happened to some businesses because they just can't find another alternative. But if you get a very good landlord who's willing to work with you, then you'll survive it, right? So it's it really is a combination of multiple factors that you can't really predict. But to your question, as a direct answer, yes, that businesses will continue to shut down, right? That it's inevitable because cash flow is something that you need to have to be able to survive.
The longer it takes, the more will be gone. It's as simple as that. So the equation is, if there is surpluses in business, they will continue. If there is deficit, how long can they last? So it's not a difficult equation. And with that is factoring all the support scheme. So basically, we hope the vaccine is a hope, but still that vaccine will still take time. It will take many, many months before it is distributed, people get inoculated, and then, and then it's not about just relating to borders. It's not just about Singapore. It's about the rest of the world, especially in the region. Sorry, Robbie.
No, it's fine. On that point, Ee Chien, I mean, respectfully, what do you see is that split between good landlords and the opposite? Because from my conversations across retail in Singapore, I would say the very vast majority have not been supportive at all.
Yeah, I mean, we moved not in part. I guess the main reason why we moved is because Jekyll Hyde in particular had a really
good landlord,
right? Yeah, a good landlord. No, like a rather.
Dennis, you're not Ee Chien's landlord, are you?
No. Oh, I wish.
Unfriendly landlord, right? But thankfully we got one, and yes, the fact that there's an organization called SG Tough, which is basically like SG, like Tenants for Fair. I can't remember what it actually stands for, but like basically this grievances against against landlords. And you just read the threads, it's pretty damning, right? Like I think one of the other cocktail bars called Samitai, they had this like really bad landlord that basically forced them out, and then also were really terrible with some of the other aspects of that. So one of the conversations that's been going on is about whether or not this will fundamentally change a landlord-tenant relationship. And I guess to a certain extent it has, because the government has mandated it. But it's only for this COVID period of time, right? So I don't know if the long run, whether it's actually going to change the name of the game at all. I honestly think that, just from my 2 cents, is that it will eventually move back to a landlord positive or landlord heavy system, right? Where the landlords are the ones that still control it more than the tenants. But
have there been any sort of measures that have come through during this period that you feel would be good to implement in a long-term basis?
Yeah, so in terms of what they have put in place is that basically the landlords can't do certain things over a certain period of time unless there are certain pointers in place. And I think if that continues, obviously, if they structure in such a way where contracts are not are more balanced between the landlord and tenant, then that would definitely help.
Two questions I have. One of them was, you may recall, if you're on Facebook, the establishment of a Facebook group called Singapore Restaurant Rescue, which exploded onto the scene. In fact, it's two friends of mine, Charlotte Wilkinson and Perry Young, who set it up together with a team of experienced marketeers, non-profit, but specifically designed to help restaurants who did not have an ongoing delivery platform to find a voice, and also to work independently where possible from the likes of your Food Pandas and Deliveroo, who are taking, still 30% off the top or thereabouts. Was anything similar created for nightlife? Because that page to this day, I just checked, it has 83,000 members. I'm almost entirely sure all of them are in Singapore, and it's really been a huge support to the restaurant scene. What has been set up to support bars, clubs, KTVs, etc. in a similar vein, or has there not been anything?
Nothing, right? So I think the ones that can, the ones that can operate are actually on Restaurant Rescue, right? So
yes,
Hyde is
it's difficult to deliver the experience of nightlife because it is an intangible. Whereas food is a tangible, and you can taste it wherever you are. So that's the difference if you talk about delivering a nightlife experience. We tried it, during the circuit breaker. A group of us, we had whiskey at hand every Thursday at 6 p.m. And we will talk on Zoom, yes. And we find a way out, but it is a different experience, So it's hard to deliver, literally, nightlife, unless, it is all about interaction. So it's different.
One thing we haven't mentioned is the impact on the alcohol industry and the distributors and the wholesalers. And what's your opinion on that? I mean, I've heard mixed things. A lot of them have pivoted online, and a lot of them are seeing big growth on their alcohol delivery for their brands, and some of them put together really cool new e-commerce platforms. But what's the word on the street in terms of the booze and the all-important booze industry, without which there wouldn't be any bars, clubs, or KTVs in the first place? Right?
Well, they're actually quite fine. I was just talking with one of our suppliers the other day. I mean, to your point, Robbie, like when the lockdown happened, retail sales surged.
Yes.
So I think it was pretty much almost to what they were doing with on trade. So their trade business is still down just a little bit. I think like 20% or something, but retail's more than made up for it. So I think for suppliers and in general, they're actually doing better, because if you're looking at it from a consumer standpoint, right, when you go out to a nightclub or you go out to a bar, you're paying say $200 for a bottle, right? But when you can be drinking at home and you're paying $60 for the same bottle or $70 for the same bottle, you're buying 3 bottles as opposed to 1, right? So for them,
Ee Chien, you should pivot by saying good things because we give value. It's the experience.
No, we do, and we do. We definitely do, right? But it's more of like just from a supplier perspective.
Yeah, understand.
Yeah. The only thing is, there are not many people that I know of who are ordering trains of Jeroboams of champagne to their homes.
Yeah, but they're ordering the wine and the beer and the whiskey and all that, right? So.
Yeah. And again, I think it's product and vertical specific. Some of them, like wine and beer and certain spirits, I guess, are maintaining their sales revenue or channels. But I'm sure champagne is struggling. I mean, there are no weddings, there are no brunches, there are no trains of 30, 40 bottles of champagne being ordered at a time. I mean, it must have a big impact. And I know Singapore has traditionally, really grown the champagne consumption dramatically through the clubs and festivals and events in particular.
Well, hopefully we'll be able to do that sometime next year.
We've got a couple of questions that have come through. We could just look at that. One is asking, can businesses implement COVID proofing for possible future pandemics? What have we learned from this that we think could be in your toolkit in case something happens that you can pull up and apply?
No, I was thinking I mean, during this period, lots of thinking. Then we're thinking prototypes. How let's say a particular precinct can weather this if it comes, and then but end of the day, it's still the authorities whether they are willing to take the position with the operators. Now, even you put in the best measures, what is their risk appetite? Because really, it's a trade-off between risk and economics. So with that as background, I share with you a particular prototype. Let's say you're a precinct with about 20 different night spots. Then you will have one entry point, which is also a night spot, meaning that you will do the test there. In case a pandemic breakout, in future, the test will be done there. And if you're test positive, then you won't be admitted. But once you're negative, then you go into the whole precinct. So there's one way. It's like litmus test entrance venue. So something like that may be there, but end of the day, like I say, it depends on what's the risk appetite of the authorities.
I mean, even that's being applied to some extent. When you go to a shopping center, you have a general entrance, you take a temperature, and so on and so forth. When you go into a shop within that, your temperature is still taken again.
No temperature, but is a test. It's like the COVID
once
test.
the test is in place.
Yes, that's
test.
right. It takes quick test, 20 minutes to know the result. Okay. And then have that bar as a holding area.
Are you suggesting that nightlife has a more stringent testing mandate than, for example, a shopping mall?
I would think so, because I think many of the spikes and clusters overseas actually come from night spots. But now that you mentioned this, every time you go on major media, they will always mention bars and restaurants. As if bars is the more risky and is upfront. So I actually, and that the way that's been handled is true. Bars are the first to close and last to open, and the duration between the closures is very fast. But the duration between different sectors of opening is very slow, and the bar is right at the end. I don't know how long you're going to take, before it reopens.
But I think some of the social distancing. I think some of the social distancing measures, for example, there are bars where restaurant is where food is being served currently, and you're able to drink in the bar. You're just not allowed to order at the bar or stand at the bar. You have to tables are dispersed.
No, there is a difference. So there is a difference, Robbie. There's the difference when it comes to bar. Why bars with food content are allowed to open? Because when you have food, you are seated. Once you are seated, you can do the distancing measure, because you can have distance between table, and people sitting will be within their same group and limited to 5 now. But when you're a bar, when you order anything without food, you mingle, you move around. That's where the difference is. That's why restaurants with food and bars with food are allowed to open.
Or do you suspect that it has something to do with people's obedience once they've had one too many? Is that a concern, perhaps?
That's 10:30. They will check that to some extent.
Right.
So they thought of everything. That's why.
But I mean, you'll know from experience that in the past, most of your patrons probably wouldn't arrive until 10:30.
I think there's a changing of habits now. Right?
Habits,
people will realize you can't get it after 10:30.
Now you have happy hour at 3 p.m. maybe.
But I guess to Robbie's point is that, like, at a certain, I think what we're realizing is that people are still used. I mean, even if people are starting to drink earlier, right? Like, 10:30 is a very very time to start drinking. It's very awkward. You're like not inebriated. You're also not completely sober. So it's this odd. And I think at the end of the day, people can't be drinking at 3 p.m. all the time, right?
I agree with you, Ee Chien. The next part is the extension of the operating hours. By 1 hour, it can do so much to the bottom line of operators.
Because most people make most of their money then, right? But but I guess
how much do you think the operators are losing by all these measures? Any idea what sort of hit they're taking to the bottom line?
Depends. I mean, some of them aren't doing too badly, actually. I think the people are drinking more quickly, fast and furious.
Are you sure? Okay, interesting. It's fast and furious. You know, actually, restaurant average check has gone up. For some of the better restaurants, because restaurant becomes a eating as well. Usually after dinner you go to a club, but now they are at the restaurant, and actually, but many restaurants can actually continue, right, Ee Chien? But you can't sell drinks.
Yeah,
so there's a difference. You can't consume either. Yeah, you can't.
But all restaurants close at 10:30 because there's no point opening. Yeah, there's no point having your staff when no one's going to be eating, right? But I guess, Rob, for you, you're looking more at the international scene, right, in terms of how like the nightlife business is being affected. I think one of the questions is more about how it's affecting the international as well as even maybe the regional scene. How have you seen that? Because I think you might be a bit more connected with that point of view.
Are you asking me? Sorry.
Yeah.
Robbie. Yeah.
I mean, look, I'm British, and I'm reading about pubs closing in the UK, and I mean, I think Singapore, having almost entirely stamped out COVID in the community, is already leagues ahead of other countries, and so that is obviously extremely important and valuable, so long as we can develop and maintain the domestic market, which, albeit is considerably smaller than most other major cities, given the size of our population. But yeah, I mean, it's a struggle globally. I have tons of friends who are DJs, who are bar operators, club operators, and the vast majority of them, with or without the furlough, are on their knees. They are losing money just because, and you'll both understand this, extremely well, the impact of fixed costs, whether it's the rent or the rates, or also in Singapore, look at the many expatriate employees of bars who, are not getting a single dime from the government. Not that that's necessarily a shortcoming. Of course, one government should always protect their own, but it is a reflection of the massive impact that we are going to see on the other side of this tunnel. The scene, the cocktail scene, the mixologists, the resident DJs, the music makers. I mean, a lot of these guys have left Singapore. There has been an enormous exodus of these guys on their employment passes, which have either expired or not been renewed, or simply their employees can no longer foot their wage bill in the face of zero or very, very little revenue.
Yeah, actually, it's amazing. Yeah, now that you mentioned it, the expatriates in the industry are badly hit. And cocktail bars, actually, in terms of percentage of these expatriates are quite high, actually.
Yeah, so the experience, I mean, it's going to be a big shift in the makeup. Yes, of course, there's a big opportunity for Singaporeans to fill the void. But the point is the whole matrix of nightlife, which had become, if you look at last year, 2019, I have to say Singapore's nightlife scene was one of the most attractive, dynamic, vibrant across all sectors of nightlife, from concerts to theatre to festivals to clubs to bars to restaurants and bars. We really, really did have one of the most appealing and tourism-worthy night scenes on the planet, guys. Right?
Thank you. That's wonderful. Really,
it certainly wasn't the case in the 90s, Dennis, as you'll recall.
Yes.
So
big difference.
Being able to regain that reputation and its impact on Singapore as a destination for tourism, as a transit venue where people choose to have a couple of nights here before then, perhaps flying on to Australia or wherever it may be. That is the critical concern at this juncture, is to preserve what we created and built up over so many years together. That is something I think the government and the STB in particular are very concerned about, very, very concerned about.
Okay, we're on the last minute of this discussion, so we've got to wind it up. I just wanted to ask one question of all of you. Given all of this that's taken place, if you were thinking of entering an industry, would you still look at entering this night scene industry? Ee Chien, since you're
I mean, to your point, right? Like if there is going to be a consolidation of businesses, right?
Yes.
So, I mean, if you're willing to take if you're willing to bet that things will go back to normal, which it will. I mean, the stock market was a great example of how that happened in a very short period of time, right? But if you're looking from a business's perspective, yeah, I mean, if you have the cash, I would hold the cash and then yes, start it, because you're going to be able to take advantage of that wave when it eventually opens up again.
On that point, my answer would be, again, yes, but wholly contingent upon the type of lease agreement one can negotiate with a landlord in your area of preference.
Yeah.
And I would suggest that base rentals, you can forget about it, but rather a model whereby it's a percentage of revenue is the only way that new businesses in nightlife are going to have any chance in hell in surviving with the continued. I mean, guys, please don't for a second think, oh, we've got a couple of vaccines being talked about and Singapore's going to test it. It's all hogwash until it's actually been administered to every last member of the population. Yeah. And then still you have the concern, well, you know, oh, our neighbors haven't used the vaccine, or they use a different vaccine. You know, the vaccine is it's a false. I think it just gives a lot of hope. The stock market there, Ee Chien, is reflecting that hope, but it is nothing more than hope at this stage. We are still very much resolutely in phase 2. And, you know, personally, I'm still holding my breath as to whether we will move to phase 3, as was possibly suggested in time for Christmas. So we can at least host more than 5 people at home for Christmas, right?
Fingers crossed on that one. They didn't say which Christmas.
The one thing that's sad about it, I don't think will happen, is New Year's Eve. I'm pretty sure it's a 10:30 New Year's Eve still, which is going to be weird.
Everybody celebrate, go to bed after that.
We're going to have to move the
Dennis, what about you, Dennis?
I'm retired, but there is potential opportunities because costs should go down as long as the product that comes out is compelling for the situation that will attract people, address the fear factor, at the same time give them the fun they seek for. I think there's a chance, but because of my anticipation is that costs will come down, and if you have a good concept in these circumstances, there is opportunity for those who seek, to remain or to start in nightlife.
So I guess like anything else, it's about a good concept, working the right negotiations in terms of with your landlords and tenancy agreement, and trying to understand how all of this plays out. Gentlemen, thank you for all your inputs. I think even without drinks, this was a very lively discussion among the three of you. Were excellent because you brought different aspects of the industry into play. And I look forward to catching up maybe at a bar at some point soon, yes, and having a good year end and a good year ahead. Thanks again for sharing. Thank you.